A proposal from Congressman Duncan Hunter, how he wants the president to put the military to work now that they're being mobilized at the border.
I think they can find me here, just like in Honduras. I'm scared, even though I'm far away.
The dangerous journey for asylum seekers. A teenage mom tells KPBS about the threat to her family even after arriving in the U.S. And even the smallest races are drawing a lot of outside money during this election. See how it's influencing politics in Solana Beach. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. President Trump is mobilizing thousands of troops to assist in border security. But today at the border, one local congressman said they should be doing a lot more. KPBS reporter Priya Sridhar has more on Duncan Hunter's pitch to the president.
Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter arrived to his press conference with Diane Harkey, Republican candidate for Congress from the 49th District, and Juan Hidalgo, Republican candidate for Congress from the 51st District. Despite running for re-election for his own seat in the 50th District, Hunter said today's press conference was not a campaign event.
We're not talking campaign stuff. Right now we have an army of migrants bearing down on the U.S. from multiple third world countries.
Hunter sent a letter to President Trump saying that the U.S. military being deployed to stop the migrant caravan should focus on building a foundational road.
The military on its way to the border now is the time to strike and start building the border road. That is something that will save America billions of dollars. It'll save man hours, it'll save time, and we can get a jump start on the border wall.
He also said he wants more detention facilities to be built for asylum seekers awaiting their court date.
Have the military build detention facilities on the border where we keep the people there until their cases can be adjudicated. And we ought to ship in judges and lawyers to those detention facilities to do it as fast as possible so we can start sending people home who don't belong here.
With 5 days till the election, Hunter has been sending out mailers showing his position on immigration versus his opponent's Democratic candidate Amar Campa-Najjar. Najjar says using the caravan is a political stunt and that Hunter's assertions that he wants an open border and amnesty are false.
I've always been strong about my views on having to make sure that we strengthen our ports of entry so we know who and what's coming in. That's true about every part of our border.
Campa-Najjar says he thinks it's too early to send the military to the border and that the president should reassess once the caravan gets closer. He says he doesn't believe that asylum seekers should wait for their court dates in detention facilities. Priya Sridhar, KPBS News.
This week, KPBS border reporter Jean Guerrero is focusing on the dangers asylum seekers face in Mexico. And today, she has the story of a teenager who made it into the U.S. after a life-threatening journey.
8-month-old Johandri's mom escaped here from Honduras. She's 16 and spoke with us on condition of anonymity. She asked us to call her Gabriela because she feared for her life in Tijuana.
I think they can find me here, just like in Honduras. I'm scared, even though I'm far away.
Gabriela's at a migrant shelter with other teenagers. She spends her days drawing and watching TV, playing with Johandri. She was recently assigned a psychologist because of death threats she says she's received, including one from a stranger in Tijuana. She says it all started a year ago at a school in Honduras when she got a message from a local cartel boss known as El Diablo through her classmates who were his associates.
They asked if I could see him, but who wants to meet a person from a gang? I just ignored them.
When she got pregnant by her boyfriend, Gabriela says El Diablo's associates stopped her on her way home from school. They had another message.
They said they weren't going to let the boy be born.
Terrified, she hopped on a bus to the U.S. Her boyfriend said he'd catch up with her later. She says her son was born in southern Mexico, in a public bathroom. There, she joined a caravan of asylum seekers, the first one that provoked the wrath of President Trump earlier this year. When they arrived at the border, she thought they were finally safe. But then she heard the Trump administration was taking babies from parents once they entered the U.S. She realized she had nothing to prove her child was hers.
I couldn't turn myself in because I don't have the boy's birth certificate.
When we spoke to Gabriela, she was working to get the baby's documents through Mexico's Child Protective Services. In the meantime, she was trying not to leave the shelter for fear that El Diablo could find her.
I have heard from advocates at other border points of separations.
Attorney Nicole Ramos says Central Americans aren't safe in Mexico because gangs like MS-13 and 18th Street have networks all the way to the border.
These organizations they're highly organized. They have amazing communication systems, and they are able to track people and find people if they have an interest in finding them.
As homicide rates are at an all-time high in Tijuana, Gabriela feared she could also end up dead, like so many other bodies overcrowding the morgue in Tijuana. And it's not just the gangs Gabriela fears. Like other Central American asylum seekers, she fears she could be deported by Mexican officials. Mexico has deported more than 16,000 children so far this year. Mexico receives millions of dollars from the U.S. to round up Central Americans and ship them back home. Ramos says the U.S.-Mexico collaboration to keep asylum seekers away from the U.S. is illegal. Her advocacy group, Al Otro Lado, is challenging the Department of Homeland Security in federal court in San Diego.
There is no basis in the federal regulations or the statutes that allows for the U.S. government to designate part of its processing responsibilities or authorities to a foreign government, particularly a foreign government with its own history of human rights abuses.
The Department of Homeland Security declined to comment on the way it's processing asylum seekers at the ports, citing the pending lawsuit. Mexico's ambassador to the U.S. rejects the idea that Mexico is doing any favors for the U.S.
What we do on migration policy, we do it because it's in A, our best interest, or B, it is established in our own laws.
What about the argument that these are people who are fleeing violence, human rights attorneys who say that Mexico is actually breaking international refugee law on behalf of the United States by deporting these people back to Central America? What does Mexico say about that?
Well, I would respectfully say that they're wrong.
Back at the shelter, Gabriela takes joy in her son as she hides from Mexican officials and cartels.
I talk to him. I play with him. I laugh with him. We have unforgettable times together.
Gabriela says her boyfriend decided not to follow her after all, so it's just her and the baby. Although Gabriela feared for her life in Mexico, she was willing to wait for her baby's papers. She didn't want to risk losing him to the U.S. government, not after saving him from the gang in her hometown. And the wait was worthwhile. Shortly after we interviewed her, she was able to cross into the U.S. with her baby, where she's now pleading her asylum case. But now, Gabriela faces yet another hurdle. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has moved to deny asylum to people fleeing gang violence. So while she escaped death and family separation, she may still end up deported back to El Diablo. Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
San Diego Superior Court Judge Gary Kreep is facing a tougher than usual re-election campaign. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen says challenger Matt Brower is trying to unseat him.
Judges' races are usually pretty low profile in California, but Judge Gary Kreep is not your average candidate. He's perhaps best known locally for being a central figure in the birther movement, which spread false claims about President Obama's citizenship. Last year, Kreep was also severely reprimanded by the State Commission on Judicial Performance for campaign violations and misconduct in the courtroom. Matt Brower is Kreep's opponent on the ballot. He's a deputy district attorney and a judge advocate in the Marine Corps.
I'm running on a platform of removing bias from the courtroom and treating all people professionally and with dignity and respect in the context of ensuring that all people in our community, when they come into the courts, that they are given a fair trial.
Kreep got 30% of the vote in June, an unusually poor performance for an incumbent judge. Brower, who came in second, says he thinks he knows why.
I think that what that is a statement on the part of the people here in San Diego County that they're aware of Judge Kreep and that they are not supportive of somebody who they see as having values very different from theirs.
Kreep declined an interview request, but in recent interviews, he's repeated his birther conspiracy theories. On courtroom misconduct, he's defended some of his actions and suggested the state judicial panel was biased against him. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
As mailboxes fill up with election material, KPBS wants you to show us your mailers. Tonight, Claire Tragesser looks at city council races in Solana Beach, which have been targeted by outside money.
Solana Beach voters will choose 2 new city council members in the November 6th election. And ahead of next Tuesday, a political action committee based in Murrieta is spending thousands of dollars on campaign mailers to attack the current representatives. The group Citizens for Government Integrity sent mailers that read, "It's time to end corruption on the city council, and taxpayers are victims of a corrupt city council." They support the election of Craig Nelson and Sean McClondon, who withdrew from the race. Citizens for Government Integrity has La Mesa City Councilman William Baber as its treasurer and former state senator Dennis Hollingsworth as a controlling officer. Solana Beach Councilwoman Lisa Huebner says she doesn't understand why outside groups would get involved in a Solana Beach race.
What exactly is a La Mesa council member doing getting deep into a Solana Beach city election? It's unusual to have a PAC go to the trouble of producing, printing, and mailing to every single household, to very expensive mailers full of baseless allegations.
Claire Tragesser, KPBS News.
Baber told KPBS he is a professional accountant with dozens of clients who are political committees, and he's not responsible for what those committees send out. KPBS media partner iNewsSource is following the money this election season. Earlier, Jill Castellano gave me an update on spending for high-profile congressional races. Jill, so the 49th congressional race has been getting a lot of attention. It's actually considered highly competitive, with Democrat Mike Levin going up against Republican Diane Harkey. How are the candidates doing when it comes to fundraising?
Well, Mike Levin, like you said, he's the Democrat in this very competitive race. He's raised 4 times what Diane Harkey has, which means he has a huge advantage. And that's pretty interesting considering that the person who held this seat for 8 terms was a Republican, Darrell Issa. So he's doing really well. And if you just narrow it down to how they're doing right now in October and how they're doing in terms of getting in front of voters, Mike Levin still has a huge advantage. He's spent $1.3 million, almost all of that on television ads. Diane Harkey, only $200,000. So he's really pulling it off in this final stretch.
And speaking of interest, have any super PACs taken an interest in this race? And if so, are they putting big money behind it?
They are, and for anyone who doesn't know, super PACs are these groups that can spend unlimited amounts of money supporting candidates as long as they don't coordinate with them. So someone who really wants Mike Levin to get elected, they can spend $1 million if they want to, saying, go vote for Mike Levin, as long as they don't tell Mike Levin they're doing that. And that's happening here. About $1.6 million have been spent to support Mike Levin through these super PACs. And Diane Harkey not getting the same treatment, only about $500,000 in this outside spending supporting her. So if you take that global look at what's getting in front of voters right now, we really do see that huge advantage for the Democrat in this race.
So moving on to another competitive race, the 50th Congressional District, which has been getting a lot of attention, even being spoken about by President Donald Trump. This is where Congressman Duncan Hunter is fighting to keep his seat after being federally indicted for misspending campaign funds. He's going up against Democrat Amar Campa-Najjar, who you report is out fundraising him. Tell me more about this.
Right, so Amar Campa-Najjar has a lot of money, about 3 times as much as Duncan Hunter has in this race, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to win. Duncan Hunter, even though he's indicted, he's the Republican, he's an incumbent, he's in this district that Donald Trump won by 15 points over Hillary Clinton. So even in this scenario, they don't necessarily want to go for a Democrat and a name they don't recognize. That being said, Amar Campa-Najjar still has a good chance. He's spent $1.1 million in October so far. Duncan Hunter hasn't even reached $200,000. So we'll see how this plays out as time goes on.
Now, we are just days away from the election. What's left to do for these candidates? Can they still campaign, or they're campaigning to the last minute?
Of course, they're not going to stop. So they are going out, reaching as many communities as possible, holding rallies, talking to as many people as they can about the final message they want voters to know about them before they go to the polls. And we'll see what happens.
Very interesting. Jill Castellano, iNews Source reporter. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
In the race for U.S. Senate, both candidates spoke recently with KQED's Scott Schaefer. Tonight, we have his conversation with Senator Dianne Feinstein.
Senator Feinstein, thanks for coming in.
Oh, you're so welcome.
You are asking the voters for another 6-year term. What would you like to do with your time?
Well, what I want to do is be constructive and be helpful to our state, to our nation, and California today is either the 5th or 6th largest economic power on earth. So I would like to see that economic power properly delivered to make the world a better place for people.
You, of course, are on the Intelligence Committee. You're privy to all kinds of information about things that are happening with our allies and with our adversaries. And I want to ask you about Saudi Arabia, because, of course, the apparent murder of Jamal Khashoggi has put a lot of focus on the attention on Saudi Arabia. What do you think the U.S. should do with regard to punishing or responding to what's happened?
Well, I can tell you what I won't do. I will not vote for Saudi arms sales. I'm concerned about how they're conducting the war in Yemen, the school buses they've hit, the children they've killed, and I'm really surprised that this was enabled by the monarchy to take place, and it had to have been that way. I think we all know enough of the story now to know that this just didn't happen. It was planned. People were sent to carry it out. This is not anyone's way, let alone the American way.
So you don't buy the president's line that we can't give up this $110 billion arms deal?
No. That's not what we stand for. We're not a country that revolves around arms sales. We're a country that revolves around American values and human rights values. And that's what's made this country so desirable all over the world. It's not arms sales. It's what we are as a people and what we believe. And it's our sense of what's right and what's wrong and the ability to fight for right.
I want to ask you about your reelection. You're 85 years old. And this week, Joe Biden, who I think is 75, said that if he runs for president in 2020, age is a relevant issue. Bernie Sanders said the same thing. I think he's 77 or will be soon. Do you think is it a relevant issue in this race?
Sure. I mean, it's a consideration. If people want somebody younger, they have somebody younger. I really believe that my history has given me certain abilities to do certain things. And if people don't agree with that, then vote another way. But my health is good. I can go the distance. I enjoy it. And a good part of my life is wrapped around helping people. It's just, for me, their satisfaction. I can tell you individual stories, but it makes my life worthwhile too, and I can give to people.
You were mayor of San Francisco for many years, and there is a measure on the San Francisco ballot, Measure C, would tax the wealthiest companies in San Francisco and generate about $350 million a year for homelessness. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, is for it. Mayor Breed and others are against it. What's your position?
I'm for it.
Why?
Yes, because we have to help. We don't have a choice. When you see someone lying, and I just did, on a hot sidewalk, sleeping with nothing, that's not the United States of America. And particularly if they happen to be an addict, an alcoholic, or medically ill.
The critics of Measure C, and they include the Chamber of Commerce and others, say that it's going to cost jobs and that it's going to influx too much money, that they don't have a plan for spending.
Look, I'm going to vote for virtually almost any homeless plan. I just am, because this is my country. This is my city. I grew up in San Francisco. People weren't homeless. A lot of people looked at it, well, this will last for 5 years and then it'll pass. It hasn't. It's gotten worse. It's involved more families, more youngsters.
I think it's been about, if my math is right, 30 years since you've been mayor. of San Francisco.
That's about right.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, you know, the city now is so different, and especially the economy. I mean, the tech industry is so prevalent now. And I'm wondering, like, what do you see as the upside and the downside of those changes?
Well, the upside is jobs. And the upside is producing a whole new generational competitive workforce based on new instruments, which is technology, which didn't exist those 30 years ago. And it's kind of fascinating to watch. History is going to show us whether it's worthwhile or not.
What do you see as the downside?
To be very candid, I don't see tech as very civically involved. And I think they have to be. And I think the CEOs, like when I was mayor, the CEOs of the big banks, I could go in and ask them to help with any civic cause. Cross my heart, I never got a no.
Why do you think CEOs today in the tech industry are less receptive to that?
I don't understand it, to be honest with you. It's a much more reserved world. It's sort of a world apart to some extent. To meet with some of the tech leaders, and I guess they're like any other group of people. There are some that want to be helpful, and there's some that don't.
Senator Dianne Feinstein, thank you so much for coming in.
Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can get ready for the election with the KPBS Voters Guide. We have a link right on our homepage. It's a partnership with Voters Edge California. You'll find information on all of the races and candidates right now at kpbs.org.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, in the final days before the election, we explore allegations of efforts to keep minority voters away from the polls. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
As time marches on, hard to believe that November is here, so it's time for a quick look back at how we did in October. October was a fairly warm month for us. We had temperatures that ran about 2.5 degrees above average at San Diego International Airport, and this was a month with precisely average precipitation. We had 0.57 inches. Actually, the National Weather Service folks in San Diego pointed out that there have been 3 months this year in which it's kind of uncanny, but San Diego International happened to land at precisely average precipitation amounts. So hats off to them for noticing that. And now we had 4 days with precipitation last month, and most of the month was dry, but of our 0.57, almost half of an inch fell just on October 12th. That's how it stacked up. Right now we are dry, a quiet night for us, not much of any cloud cover, a little bit of very thin clouds rolling in from the north. It'll be a mainly clear night for us. We'll get down to around 61 in San Diego. Borrego Springs around 57 degrees, Mount Laguna 45 for your low. So a clear sky for us for the most part tonight, and we'll get down to around 61. Very nice weather for our Friday. High pressure still in control. Pleasant weather, less of a fire danger risk. Not zero, but still somewhat of a reduced risk of fire danger. And you can see that we're on track for highs around 89 into El Cajon, 82 into San Diego, Borrego Springs 89 degrees. And the outlook for the weekend holds on to the warm weather with most of the western action up in the Pacific Northwest. So our 5-day forecast for the coast. Great weather out there Friday, Saturday. If you like the warmth, it will be with us. Now, the coast will cool down a bit into Monday and Tuesday. Inland areas, this is where it is downright warm, deep into the upper 80s on Friday and Saturday. A good deal of sunshine, some cooling into Monday and Tuesday as a trough begins to bring an impact. And the mountain forecast, 60s, upper 60s Saturday, a little cooler into the low 60s Monday and Tuesday. Dry weather persists for the deserts. We're going to be up near 90, if not warmer than that, on Saturday, then some cooling. I'm Jeff Cornish for KPBS News.
From Glee to Wicked, it's a big weekend for musical theater here in San Diego, plus a grand composer is celebrated. Here with more is KPBS arts editor Nina Guerin.
Halloween may be over, but we can still celebrate witches with the return of Wicked to Broadway San Diego. This musical happens long before Dorothy arrives in Oz, giving the story an entirely new perspective. Instead of being the Wicked Witch of the West, Elphaba is a bright, feisty student who forms an unlikely bond with the popular Glinda. But as injustices begin happening around her, Elphaba has to decide what side to fight for. Is she actually wicked? This musical just celebrated its 15th year on Broadway and continues to be a favorite around the world. Fans of musicals will also want to head over to Humphreys, where actors Lea Michele and Darren Criss will be performing. Michelle and Criss are both known from the TV show Glee, as well as for appearing in Broadway musicals like Spring Awakening and Hedwig and the Angry Inch. This concert features solo material by both singers, plus duets from theater favorites, and of course, songs and stories from Glee. Finally, you can see excerpts from some of the most loved ballets at this weekend Tchaikovsky Spectacular. City Ballet pays tribute to the Russian composer by performing the second act of Swan Lake, complete with full scenery and costumes. You'll also see the famous Black Swan Pas de Deux. On the program is also Chai Celebration, a contemporary ballet set to Tchaikovsky's The Seasons. This is a large group ballet choreographed by Elizabeth Wistrich. For KPBS Arts, I'm Nina Guerin.
You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.